Lieutenant Sarah Chen had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates in high school were worried about prom dates and college applications, Sarah was already planning her military career. At 17, she could do more push-ups than most boys in her class. By 18, she had memorized every military manual she could get her hands on. Sarah grew up in a small town in Oregon where her father worked as a firefighter and her mother taught elementary school. Both parents had served in the military before Sarah was born, and their stories of service filled the dinner table conversations throughout her childhood. Her father would tell her about the brotherhood he felt with his fellow soldiers, while her mother spoke about the pride of serving something bigger than yourself. The decision to join the Navy came naturally to Sarah. What surprised everyone, including her parents, was her announcement that she wanted to try out for the SEALs. In 2015, when Sarah made this decision, women had only recently been allowed to attempt the training. The path ahead was unclear, difficult, and filled with people who doubted whether women belonged in special operations. Sarah's parents worried about her choice, but they also knew their daughter well enough to understand that once she set her mind on something, there was no changing it. Her determination had been evident since childhood. When she was 12, Sarah had broken her arm, falling from a tree. Instead of crying or complaining, she had calmly walked home, told her parents what happened, and asked when she could climb trees again. The Navy recruiter in Portland was surprised when Sarah walked into his office. Most people who inquired about the SEALs were men who had already spent years in the Navy or other military branches. Sarah was a college freshman with no military experience, but she spoke about her goals with such clarity and determination that the recruiter found himself taking her seriously. Sarah spent the next 2 years preparing for the Navy while finishing her degree in criminal justice. She woke up at 4 in the morning every day to train. Her workout routine included swimming in the cold Oregon rivers, running in the mountains near her town, and strength training that pushed her body to its limits. She studied military history, tactics, and everything she could find about SEAL operations. Her college classmates thought she was crazy. They would see her leaving the dormitory before sunrise and returning after dark. Exhausted but focused, while they went to parties and social events, Sarah spent her weekends training or studying. Some people called her antisocial, but Sarah knew what she wanted, and she was willing to sacrifice everything else to achieve it. When Sarah finally enlisted in the Navy, she was in the best physical shape of her life. Basic training was challenging, but she had prepared so thoroughly that she finished near the top of her class. Her instructors noticed her immediately, not just because she was one of the few women, but because of her work ethic and natural leadership abilities. After basic training, Sarah spent 2 years serving on a destroyer, learning about Navy operations, and proving herself as a reliable sailor. During this time, she continued training for the SEAL selection process. She knew that her opportunity to attempt the training might be her only chance, and she was determined not to waste it. The announcement that she had been selected for SEAL training came on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah was standing on the deck of her ship, watching the sunrise over the Pacific Ocean, when her commanding officer approached her with the news. She had been accepted to begin basic underwater demolition, SEAL training, known as BUD-S, in 2 months. Sarah called her parents that evening to share the news. Her mother cried with joy and worry at the same time. Her father simply said he was proud of her and that he believed she would succeed. That night, Sarah stood alone on the ship's deck, looking at the stars and thinking about the journey ahead. She knew that the hardest part of her life was about to begin. The Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California, became Sarah's new home in May. The base was unlike anything she had experienced before. The atmosphere was intense, focused, and filled with some of the most physically and mentally tough individuals she had ever encountered. The other candidates in her BUD-S class were all men, most of whom had been preparing for this training for years. Sarah's arrival at the base attracted attention she had not expected. News crews wanted to interview her, and military officials wanted to observe how she would perform. Sarah found all of this attention uncomfortable and distracting. She had not joined the military to become famous or to prove a point about women's capabilities. She joined because she wanted to serve her country at the highest level possible. The first phase of BUD training was designed to test physical and mental endurance. Candidates were pushed to their absolute limits through endless runs on the beach, swimming in the cold Pacific Ocean, and exercises that seemed impossible to complete. The instructors, seasoned SEALs themselves, showed no mercy to anyone, regardless of their background or gender. Sarah struggled during the first weeks of training, not because she was not physically prepared, but because the intensity was beyond anything she had imagined. The instructors would wake the candidates up in the middle of the night for surprise exercises. They would make them carry heavy boats over their heads for miles. They would force them to do thousands of push-ups, sit-ups, and other exercises until their muscles screamed in pain. Many candidates quit during the first phase. Some walked away after a few days. Others lasted weeks before deciding they could not continue. Sarah watched good men, strong men, ring the bell that signaled their withdrawal from the program. Each time someone quit, it reminded her how difficult this path truly was. The physical challenges were matched by mental pressure. The instructors constantly tested the candidates' ability to think clearly under stress. They would give them complex problems to solve, while forcing them to do exercises. They would put them in situations where there seemed to be no right answer, just to see how they would react. Sarah found that her years of preparation had given her something valuable: the mental strength to keep going when everything inside her wanted to stop. When her body was exhausted and her mind was telling her to quit, she would remember why she was there. She thought about her parents' stories of service, about the sailors and soldiers who depended on special operations forces to keep them safe, and about proving that determination mattered more than anything else. As the weeks passed, Sarah began to earn the respect of her fellow candidates and even some of the instructors. She never complained, never made excuses, and never asked for special treatment. When other candidates were struggling, she would help them when possible. When she was struggling, she would push through without drawing attention to her difficulties. The swimming portions of the training were where Sarah excelled. Growing up near Oregon's rivers and spending years training in cold water had prepared her well. While other candidates struggled with the long swims in the Pacific, Sarah moved through the water with efficiency and confidence. Her times were consistently among the best in the class. Running was more challenging for Sarah. Her shorter legs meant she had to work harder to keep up with the longer strides of her male classmates. She compensated by developing perfect running form and by pushing herself harder than anyone else during training runs. By the end of the first phase, her running times had improved dramatically. The obstacle course training revealed both Sarah's strengths and weaknesses. Her upper body strength was excellent, but some obstacles required techniques that favored height and reach. Sarah studied each obstacle carefully, developing alternative approaches that worked for her body type. She practiced these techniques during her free time, often staying after official training hours to perfect her methods. As the first phase of training neared its end, Sarah had established herself as a serious candidate. She had not quit when many others had. She had met every physical standard required. She had shown the mental toughness that the instructors were looking for. But she also knew that the hardest parts of training were still ahead. The second phase of BUD/S would focus on diving and underwater operations. The third phase would cover land warfare and weapons training. Each phase would bring new challenges and new opportunities for candidates to fail. Sarah was determined to meet every challenge, no matter what it required. On the last day of the first phase, Sarah's class had shrunk from over 200 candidates to fewer than 50. She looked around at the men who remained and felt a sense of pride and belonging. These were individuals who had proven themselves through weeks of the most demanding training imaginable. They had become a team, supporting each other through the worst moments and celebrating each other's successes. That evening, Sarah called her parents to update them on her progress. Her mother asked if the training was as hard as she had expected. Sarah laughed and told her it was much harder, but that she was exactly where she belonged. Her father asked if she still wanted to continue. Sarah did not hesitate in her answer. She was going to finish this training and become a SEAL. The next morning would bring new challenges, new tests of her determination and abilities. Sarah went to sleep that night, thinking about how far she had come and how much further she still had to go. She had survived the first phase of SEAL training, but she knew that surviving was not enough. She wanted to excel. to prove that she belonged among the elite warriors she was training to become. As she drifted off to sleep in her barracks, Sarah could hear the sound of the Pacific Ocean waves hitting the beach outside. It was the same sound that had accompanied every day of her training so far, and it would continue to be the soundtrack to the most challenging period of her life. Tomorrow would bring her closer to her dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. Or it might be the day that ended that dream forever. Either way, Sarah Chen was ready to face whatever came next, with the same determination that had brought her this far. The third phase of BUD's training had begun 3 weeks earlier, and Sarah Chen was exhausted in ways she had never imagined possible. The land warfare portion of SEAL training pushed every candidate to master skills that could mean the difference between life and death in real combat situations. Weapons handling, tactical movement, explosive ordnance disposal, and close-quarters combat were all part of the intensive curriculum that separated Navy SEALs from every other military unit. Sarah had adapted well to most aspects of the training, but the close-quarters combat sessions remained her biggest challenge. The instructors emphasized that SEALs needed to be prepared for situations where firearms were not available or practical. Hand-to-hand combat, knife fighting, and improvised weapons could be the only thing standing between a SEAL and capture or death. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez was the primary instructor for combat training. A veteran of multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, Chief Rodriguez had a reputation for being tough but fair. He had initially been skeptical about having a woman in his training program, not because he doubted women's capabilities, but because he worried about how the dynamics might change in his classroom. Over the previous weeks, Chief Rodriguez had watched Sarah carefully. He noticed how she approached each lesson with intense focus, and how she stayed after hours to practice techniques that did not come naturally to her. She never complained about the physical disadvantages she sometimes faced, instead finding ways to use her smaller size and different center of gravity to her advantage. The morning of the incident started like any other training day. Sarah woke up at 0430 hours, completed her morning physical training, showered, ate breakfast, and reported to the combat training facility by 0800 hours. The facility was a large building filled with training mats, practice weapons, and equipment designed to simulate real combat environments. 18 candidates remained in Sarah's BUD.S class, down from the original 200+ who had started the program months earlier. These men had become her brothers in every sense except blood. They had suffered together, supported each other, and developed the kind of trust that only comes from shared hardship. Among them was Petty Officer Jason Murphy, a former college wrestler from Texas who had become one of Sarah's closest friends in the program. Chief Rodriguez announced that the day's training would focus on knife defense and disarmament techniques. Each candidate would practice defending against various knife attacks and learn methods for taking weapons away from attackers. The training knives were designed to simulate real combat knives but with dulled edges and points to prevent serious injury during practice. Sarah partnered with Murphy for the initial exercises. They took turns acting as attacker and defender, practicing the movements that Chief Rodriguez demonstrated. The techniques required precise timing, proper body positioning, and complete commitment to the defensive actions. A half-hearted attempt at disarming an armed opponent could result in serious injury or death in real combat. As the morning progressed, the exercises became more complex and realistic. Chief Rodriguez emphasized that knife attacks rarely happened in controlled, predictable ways. Attackers might be bigger, stronger, or more skilled than the defender. Environmental factors like poor lighting, uneven terrain, or multiple opponents could complicate any defensive situation. Sarah found herself struggling with some of the techniques that relied heavily on upper body strength to control an attacker's weapon arm. She compensated by focusing on speed and precision, using her opponent's momentum against them, rather than trying to overpower them directly. Chief Rodriguez noticed her adaptations and occasionally offered suggestions that played to her strengths. By lunchtime, all candidates had demonstrated basic proficiency in the required techniques. The afternoon session would involve more realistic scenarios, with attackers using unpredictable movements and defenders having to react without knowing what type of attack was coming. After lunch, Chief Rodriguez paired candidates randomly for the afternoon exercises. Sarah found herself matched with Petty Officer Kevin Davis, a former Marine who was known for his aggressive training style. Davis was not trying to hurt anyone, but he approached every exercise with maximum intensity, believing that realistic training would better prepare everyone for actual combat. The exercise began simply enough. Davis held a training knife and would attack Sarah in various ways while she practiced the defensive techniques they had learned. Chief Rodriguez and the other instructors moved around the training floor, observing each pair and offering corrections or encouragement as needed. Sarah successfully defended against Davis's first several attacks. She managed to deflect a downward strike, sidestep a thrust, and even successfully disarmed him during one sequence. Davis nodded approvingly and reset for the next round. The other candidates and instructors continued their own exercises around them. What happened next occurred so quickly that multiple witnesses would later give slightly different accounts of the exact sequence of events. Davis launched what was intended to be a realistic but controlled attack, simulating an assailant attempting to stab upward towards Sarah's midsection. Sarah reacted with the defensive technique she had practiced, stepping to the side while blocking Davis's weapon arm and attempting to control the knife. But Davis was moving with more force than either of them had anticipated. His momentum, combined with Sarah's redirecting motion, caused him to lose his balance and stumble forward. As he tried to regain his footing, his grip on the training knife shifted. The weapon, which should have been safely controlled in Sarah's defensive grip, slipped free and moved in an unexpected direction. The tip of the training knife, despite being dulled for safety, struck the front of Sarah's uniform with enough force to penetrate the fabric. The knife tore through the material of her shirt and continued until it met the protective vest underneath. The impact was hard enough to drive the air from Sarah's lungs and send a shock of pain through her chest. For a moment, time seemed frozen. Davis stared in horror at what had happened, his face going pale as he realized the training exercise had gone wrong. Other candidates nearby stopped their own exercises as they noticed something was happening. Chief Rodriguez, who had been observing another pair, quickly turned his attention towards Sarah and Davis. What happened next surprised everyone in the training facility, including Sarah herself. Instead of crying out, falling down, or calling for help, Sarah's reaction was instantaneous and purely instinctual. Without hesitation, she grabbed Davis by his training uniform, pivoted on her left foot, and executed a perfect hip throw that sent the much larger man flying across the training mat. Davis hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of him. Before he could recover, Sarah had moved to a position where she could have delivered a devastating follow-up strike if this had been real combat. Her movements were so smooth and fast that several observers initially thought the throw was part of the planned exercise. Only when Davis remained on the ground, gasping for air, did everyone realize that something unplanned had occurred. Sarah stood over him, her breathing controlled and her posture alert, as if she was still prepared for further attacks. The torn fabric of her uniform was clearly visible, and a small spot of blood was beginning to show where the knife had made contact with her skin. Chief Rodriguez reached them first, immediately assessing the situation. "Chen, are you injured?" he asked, his voice sharp with concern and authority. Sarah looked down at her torn uniform and the small wound on her chest, as if she was noticing them for the first time. "Negative, Chief," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "Minor penetration of the uniform and superficial contact. No significant injury." Her clinical description of what had happened demonstrated the kind of clear thinking under stress that the instructors were trying to develop in all candidates. Davis had managed to sit up, still struggling to catch his breath from Sarah's throw. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he gasped. "I didn't mean for that to happen. Are you okay? Did I hurt you?" The genuine concern in his voice was evident to everyone present. Sarah extended her hand to help Davis back to his feet. "You're fine, Davis. These things happen in training. That's why we practice." Her calm response and immediate forgiveness surprised Davis and impressed the instructors who were gathering around them. Chief Rodriguez examined Sarah's torn uniform and the small cut on her skin. The training knife had penetrated the fabric but had been mostly stopped by the protective vest underneath. The actual injury was minor, requiring only basic first aid and a band-aid. However, the fact that a training accident had resulted in any injury at all was a serious matter that required investigation and documentation. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the medical officer assigned to BUD's training, was called to examine Sarah and ensure that her injuries were indeed minor. While they waited for the doctor to arrive, Chief Rodriguez gathered all the candidates together to discuss what had happened and what lessons could be learned from the incident. Accidents happen in realistic training, Chief Rodriguez explained to the group. What matters is how we respond when things go wrong. Chen's reaction demonstrated several important principles we've been teaching you. First, she maintained situational awareness even while injured. Second, she neutralized the threat immediately and effectively. Third, she kept her composure and assessed her own condition accurately. The other candidates nodded in understanding. Several of them mentioned that they had been impressed by how quickly and smoothly Sarah had executed the throw, especially considering she had just been injured. Murphy, who knew Sarah better than most, was not surprised by her reaction. He had seen her push through pain and discomfort throughout their training, always maintaining focus on the mission and the safety of her teammates. Dr. Hernandez arrived within minutes and conducted a thorough examination of Sarah's injury. The cut was shallow and clean, requiring only antiseptic and a small bandage. However, the doctor wanted to examine Sarah more thoroughly to ensure there were no other injuries and to check for any signs of shock or delayed reaction to the trauma. While Sarah was being examined, Chief Rodriguez spoke privately with Davis to review what had happened during the exercise. Davis was clearly shaken by the incident and worried that his aggressive training style had caused the accident. The chief assured him that training accidents were part of learning realistic combat skills, but also emphasized the importance of maintaining control, even during intensive exercises. Sarah returned from her medical examination with a clean bill of health and instructions to monitor the injury for any signs of infection. She was cleared to continue training immediately, though Dr. Hernandez recommended that she avoid exercises involving heavy contact for the rest of the day. The afternoon training session continued, but the dynamic had changed. The other candidates kept glancing at Sarah, clearly impressed by how she had handled the situation. The instructors also seemed to view her differently, as if the incident had confirmed something they had suspected but had not yet seen demonstrated. During the debrief session at the end of the day, Chief Rodriguez used Sarah's reaction as a teaching example for the entire class. He explained that her immediate response to neutralize the threat, even while injured, demonstrated the kind of instinctive reaction that could save lives in real combat situations. Her ability to maintain composure and assess her condition accurately showed the mental discipline that SEALs needed in dangerous situations. Sarah felt uncomfortable being the center of attention and tried to deflect the praise to the quality of the training they had all received. Any of you would have reacted the same way, she told her classmates. We've been training for situations like this for months. The techniques work when you trust your training and react without hesitation. That evening, Sarah called her parents to tell them about the day's events before they heard about it through official channels. Her mother was worried about the injury. Even though Sarah assured her it was minor, her father asked more questions about her reaction and seemed proud of how she had handled the situation. Word of the incident spread quickly through the Naval Special Warfare Command. Officers who had been watching Sarah's progress through training were particularly interested in her reaction under stress. Some who had been skeptical about women in special operations began to reconsider their opinions based on her performance. The incident also strengthened the bonds between Sarah and her classmates. They had seen her react to an unexpected and potentially dangerous situation with the same courage and skill they hoped they would demonstrate under similar circumstances. Any remaining doubts about her place in their team were erased by her actions that afternoon. Davis approached Sarah later that evening to apologize again for the accident. Sarah refused to accept his apology, explaining that training accidents were part of learning to operate in dangerous environments. She thanked him for training with the intensity that would prepare them all for real combat situations. Their conversation helped Davis overcome his guilt about the incident and reinforced their mutual respect. As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the events of the day. The incident had lasted only seconds, but it had felt like a defining moment in her training. For the first time since beginning BUD/S, she had reacted to a real threat with the instincts and skills she had been developing. The fact that her reaction had surprised even the instructors gave her confidence that she was becoming the kind of warrior she had always wanted to be. The small bandage on her chest was a reminder that the path to becoming a Navy SEAL involved real risks and real consequences. But it was also proof that she could handle whatever challenges came her way, with the same determination and skill that had brought her this far. Tomorrow would bring new tests and new opportunities to prove herself, but tonight Sarah Chen felt ready for whatever came next. News of the training incident reached far beyond the walls of the Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado. Within hours of the event, reports were climbing the chain of command, reaching desk officers at the Pentagon, who had been closely monitoring the progress of women in special operations training. Sarah Chen's reaction to being stabbed during a training exercise became the subject of briefings, discussions, and debates at the highest levels of military leadership. Captain Jennifer Walsh, the commanding officer overseeing BUDS training, received multiple calls from senior officials wanting details about what had happened. Some callers were genuinely concerned about training safety protocols. Others were looking for evidence to support their positions on women in combat roles. Captain Walsh, a career naval officer who had been following Sarah's progress since the beginning of her training, was determined to ensure that the incident was evaluated based on facts rather than politics. Sarah remained unaware of the attention her reaction had generated outside of her immediate training environment. She woke up the morning after the incident, feeling sore from the impact but ready to continue with her training. The small bandage on her chest was the only visible reminder of what had happened, and she was determined not to let the incident affect her focus on completing BUD/S. The morning physical training session proceeded normally, with Sarah participating in all activities, despite Dr. Hernandez's recommendation to avoid heavy contact exercises. Chief Rodriguez watched her carefully but was not surprised to see her pushing herself at the same intensity as always. Her refusal to treat the injury as an excuse for reduced performance reinforced his growing respect for her determination. During breakfast, several of Sarah's classmates approached her to discuss the previous day's events. They wanted to understand how she had reacted so quickly and effectively under stress. Petty Officer Murphy, who had become one of her closest friends during training, was particularly curious about her mindset during the incident. "Honestly, I don't remember making a conscious decision to throw him," Sarah explained to the group gathered around her table. "When I felt the knife hit me, everything just happened automatically. All those hours of practicing the techniques must have created the right instincts." Her explanation impressed her classmates, who recognized that developing automatic responses to threats was exactly what their training was designed to accomplish. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement that all BUD/S candidates were to report immediately to the briefing room. This was unusual, as the normal schedule called for combat training to begin after breakfast. Sarah and her classmates quickly finished eating and made their way to the large room where they received most of their classroom instruction. Captain Walsh was waiting for them, along with several officers Sarah did not recognize. The presence of such senior leadership suggested that something important was about to happen. Though none of the candidates knew what to expect, they arranged themselves in neat rows, standing at attention until instructed to sit. Captain Walsh began by acknowledging the training incident from the previous day, and emphasizing that accidents during realistic training were both inevitable and valuable learning opportunities. She praised Sarah's reaction and used it as an example of the kind of instinctive response that made SEALs effective in dangerous situations. However, her main purpose for calling the meeting was to address something else entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Walsh announced, "you have reached the final week of BUD/S training. Over the next 7 days, you will complete your remaining qualifications and participate in a final evaluation exercise. Those of you who successfully complete all requirements will graduate from this program and earn the right to call yourselves Navy SEALs." The room erupted in quiet excitement as the candidates realized how close they were to achieving their goal. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and anxiety as she considered the final challenges ahead. She had survived 6 months of the most demanding training the military offered, but the last week would determine whether all of that effort would result in success or failure. Captain Walsh continued her briefing by explaining the final evaluation exercise. The candidates would be divided into teams and given a complex mission that would test all of the skills they had learned during training. The exercise would take place over 3 days, and would include underwater operations, land navigation, weapons handling, and close-quarters combat scenarios. Every aspect of their performance would be evaluated, and the standards for passing would be unforgiving. After the briefing, the candidates returned to their regular training schedule, but the atmosphere had changed. Everyone was focused on the upcoming final evaluation, and the intensity of their preparation increased noticeably. Sarah threw herself into review sessions, practicing techniques and studying procedures that would be critical during the final exercise. That afternoon, Chief Rodriguez approached Sarah after combat training to discuss her progress and preparation for the final evaluation. He had been observing her throughout the training program and wanted to share his assessment of her readiness for the challenges ahead. "Chen, you've come further in this program than most people thought possible," he told her during their private conversation. "Your reaction yesterday showed me that you've developed the instincts and skills that define a SEAL. But the final evaluation is going to test everything you've learned in ways that might surprise you." Chief Rodriguez explained that the final exercise was designed to push candidates beyond their comfort zones and force them to make decisions under extreme stress. Teams that worked well together would have significant advantages, while individuals who tried to succeed alone would likely fail. He emphasized the importance of trust and communication with her teammates during the evaluation. Sarah appreciated the guidance and asked Chief Rodriguez if he had any specific advice for her preparation. He smiled and told her that she was already doing everything right by maintaining her focus on continuous improvement and supporting her classmates. "The most important thing you can do is trust your training and trust your team," he advised. The next few days passed quickly as Sarah and her classmates prepared for the final evaluation. They reviewed procedures, practiced techniques, and worked together to ensure everyone was ready for the challenges ahead. The sense of teamwork that had developed over months of training became even stronger as they approached the finish line. Sarah received an unexpected visitor on Thursday evening when Captain Walsh asked to speak with her privately. They met in the captain's office, where Walsh explained that Sarah's progress through BUD/S training had attracted attention from senior military leaders who were interested in the future of women in special operations. "Your performance, especially your reaction to the training incident, has impressed people at very high levels," Captain Walsh explained. "There are discussions happening about expanding opportunities for women in special operations, based partly on what you've demonstrated here." Sarah was surprised to learn that her individual progress was being viewed as representative of broader possibilities for women in the FUN military. Captain Walsh assured Sarah that these discussions would not affect her evaluation during the final exercise. She would be judged by the same standards as every other candidate, with no consideration given to her gender or the symbolic importance of her success or failure. However, the captain wanted Sarah to understand that her achievements were opening doors for other women who might want to follow a similar path. The conversation left Sarah with mixed feelings. She was proud that her efforts might help other women pursue their military goals, but she was also concerned about the additional pressure this knowledge might create during the final evaluation. She had joined the Navy to serve her country, not to prove points about gender equality. Though she understood that her success or failure would inevitably be interpreted in those terms. The final evaluation exercise began on Friday morning with teams being assigned and mission briefings being conducted. Sarah found herself on a 5-person team that included Murphy and Davis, along with 2 other candidates she had trained with throughout the program. The familiarity and trust among team members gave Sarah confidence that they could succeed in whatever challenges lay ahead. Their mission involved infiltrating a simulated enemy compound, gathering intelligence, and extracting without being detected. The exercise would test their underwater approach skills, land navigation abilities, stealth techniques, and decision-making under pressure. Instructors playing enemy forces would be actively trying to detect and capture the teams, making the exercise as realistic as possible. The underwater portion of the mission went smoothly for Sarah's team. Their months of diving training paid off as they successfully navigated to their insertion point and established their position on shore without being detected. Sarah's swimming skills, which had been among her strongest abilities throughout training, proved valuable as she helped guide the team through the challenging underwater approach. The land navigation phase tested their ability to move quietly through unfamiliar terrain while avoiding detection. Sarah's smaller size became an advantage as she was able to move through dense vegetation and tight spaces more easily than her larger teammates. Her careful observation skills, developed during months of training, helped the team identify and avoid several potential detection points. The intelligence-gathering portion of the mission required the team to work together to infiltrate the simulated compound and locate specific information without triggering security measures. Sarah's role involved providing overwatch security, while her teammates conducted the actual search. Her attention to detail and calm demeanor under pressure proved valuable during the tense moments when enemy forces came close to discovering their position. The final phase of the mission required the team to extract from the area while being actively pursued by opposing forces. This scenario tested their ability to move quickly while maintaining stealth and to make tactical decisions under extreme stress. Sarah's training in close-quarters combat became relevant when the team was forced to neutralize simulated guards who discovered their presence. When the exercise concluded on Sunday evening, Sarah felt exhausted but confident that her team had performed well. They had completed all required objectives and had avoided capture despite several close calls. The sense of accomplishment was tempered by uncertainty about whether their performance had met the high standards required for graduation. The evaluation results were announced on Monday morning in the same briefing room where the candidates had learned about the final exercise a week earlier. Captain Walsh stood before the remaining 18 candidates who had begun the final week of training. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited to learn their fate. Over the past week, you have demonstrated the skills, knowledge, and character that define Navy SEALs. Captain Walsh began. Your performance during the final evaluation has been thoroughly reviewed by the training staff, and decisions have been made regarding your readiness to join this elite community. Captain Walsh called names one by one, announcing which candidates had successfully completed all requirements for graduation. Sarah listened as Murphy, Davis, and most of her other teammates heard their names called. When Captain Walsh spoke her name, Sarah felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. She had achieved the goal that had driven her efforts for the past 3 years. 16 of the 18 candidates who had entered the final week successfully completed the program. Sarah looked around at the men who had become her brothers through months of shared hardship and realized that they would soon be serving together as Navy SEALs. The incident with the training knife seemed like a distant memory compared to the magnitude of what they had accomplished together. The graduation ceremony took place 3 days later, in front of an audience that included family members, senior military officials, and representatives from various Navy commands. Sarah's parents flew in from Oregon to watch their daughter receive her SEAL Trident, the pin that officially marked her as a member of one of the military's most elite units. During the ceremony, Captain Walsh specifically mentioned Sarah's reaction to the training incident as an example of the kind of instinctive courage and skill that made SEALs effective in dangerous situations. The recognition was appreciated, but Sarah was more focused on the fact that she had finally achieved her dream of becoming a Navy SEAL. After the ceremony, Sarah spent time with her parents and classmates, celebrating the completion of their training and looking ahead to their future assignments. Chief Rodriguez approached her during the reception to congratulate her on her success and to share his assessment of her potential as a SEAL. You proved something important during your training, he told her. Not just about women in special operations, but about the power of determination and preparation. You earned your place here through the same qualities that make any great SEAL: intelligence, physical toughness, mental discipline, and the ability to put the mission and your teammates above yourself. Sarah thanked Chief Rodriguez for his guidance throughout the training program and asked about what she could expect in her first operational assignment. He explained that she would likely be assigned to a SEAL team on the West Coast and would continue her training in specialized skills before being declared fully operational. 6 months later, Lieutenant Sarah Chen was serving with SEAL Team 3, conducting real-world missions that utilized all of the skills she had developed during her training. The incident with the training knife had become part of the stories told about her during her early days with the team, but it was just one example of the qualities that made her an effective member of the unit. The small scar on her chest, barely visible beneath her gear, served as a daily reminder of the moment when her training had been tested by an unexpected threat. Her reaction to that incident had surprised everyone present, including herself. But it had also confirmed that she possessed the instincts and skills necessary to succeed in the most demanding military role possible. Sarah's success opened doors for other women who wanted to pursue special operations careers, just as Captain Walsh had predicted. Her example demonstrated that determination and preparation could overcome physical disadvantages and social obstacles. More importantly, it proved that the qualities that made someone an effective SEAL transcended gender and background. As Sarah prepared for another mission with her team, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small town in Oregon to one of the military's most elite units. The training knife incident had been a defining moment, but it was just one of many tests she had faced and overcome on her path to becoming a Navy SEAL. Her instant reaction had indeed left everyone stunned, but it was her long-term dedication to excellence that truly made her exceptional. Years later, when young women would ask her about pursuing military careers, Sarah would tell them that success came from preparation, determination, and the willingness to never give up on your goals. She would mention that unexpected challenges would test their resolve, but that trusting their training and maintaining focus on the mission would see them through the most difficult moments. Most importantly, she would tell them that the only limits on their achievements were the ones they accepted for themselves.